Welcome back to Mars on Life. As always, I'm Ryan, and with me as always is...
Sebastian Shug, how do we do on this fine audio venture?
I think we're doing okay. We should be fine, yeah. So, Sebastian, we finally made it to 10 episodes.
Honestly, I didn't expect to have a 0 at the end of anything when it came. At least in the beginning, it's not that I wasn't confident about it. It's just that I was very, starting up anything is just, it's like, what the hell, are you getting yourself into? I know 10 is not so much a large number, but I think to us it has shown that we've come a long way. And in illustrating that we've come a long way for our 10th episode, I think we'd like to introduce someone new to the table. So why don't you go ahead and say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Well, you can do it. You can do more than that.
Hi. I don't know. What should I say? Hi, I'm Heather Friedman. I'm Sebastian's girlfriend. I am a theater student at Cal State Northridge, finishing that up this semester. And then I'm going to be heading to grad school next semester to get my Master's of Fine Arts in Acting. So there's my arts credentials for you.
So wait, where are you going to? Where are you going to school for your Master's again? Just
the California Institute of the Arts, also known as Cal Arts.
Oh, sweet.
We got one of those.
Anyway. She'll be right by where I live.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna live there, so.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm not moving to San Francisco. Who do I look like?
That's right. Honestly, I couldn't be prouder, and I just want to brag about her for a moment. No. But I know that we have things to talk about and everything like that. I mean, this is your episode, and the topic of discussion today is definitely going to reflect that. I'll be honest, with Ryan as a mediator, it's something that I was worried was going to spark a huge debate between us. But I mean, we'll get into that after a few kind of little talking points. If there's anything you wanted to bring up, Ryan, feel free to. But I'm just kind of going to jump in if that's cool.
Yeah, well, I guess before we get on to the main topic, I guess Heather, you're our second guest on the show, so great to have you on. I guess my first thing I'd want to ask you is kind of how are you doing with the quarantine and isolation and whatnot? I know and it's probably something I would have been doing had I still been going to school. Is I've seen some of your postings on not getting to do performances and do the same sort of stuff that you were doing prior to the quarantine, especially with what seemed to me like a pretty great group of people that you've been acting off of this semester.
Well, I mean, it's the quarantine. I don't think anyone's having the greatest of times. Way to reopen old wounds.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Well, before the quarantine, I was getting to direct my first project, which was a main stage show with the CSUN Theater Department. So I was one of only 4 students who gets that opportunity a year.
Oh, wow.
So I was really excited for that. And then, unfortunately, we only got 2 weeks into rehearsal before they canceled everything and shut down the school. And so it was kind of a bummer. It was like my big send-off, I guess. But, I mean, it's okay because I don't have other opportunities in the future, and I'm glad that I got to have my big acting experience last semester, so I got to do that. But then also being in a sorority makes it kind of sad because it's my senior semester, and no senior formal, none of that kind of stuff. I guess I'm just taking it day by day though, gotta keep the routine, get up, still put on a pair of pants, and tackle the world. Lots of Zoom.
Yeah. Well, no, I merely ask about it just so kind of our audience has a kind of a grasp at sort of what you do and how it kind of ties in with our show, where we try and find people that channel their art into something that's meant for society, whether it's meant to be a reflection or a stimulant or a conversation, whatever it may be, all of which those topics in of themselves could be brought up in our discussion, which I guess we can open up now, Sebastian. We're at the 5-minute mark, and we're gonna we're gonna make our way into this.
God, already? Okay, well, first, before we begin, and just to kind of get this all on the table, I'd like to rescind my last point stated through not our last episode, but 2 episodes ago when we were with Shawnee.
Mm-hmm.
I have watched Tiger King.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't so much, and just to kind of like lay it out there, I'm watching this documentary with the intent of not liking it. Same thing as the Joker. You don't watch it to enjoy it. You watch it to get informed and essentially derive more of an analysis from that. Do I think that Joe Exotic is a dickhead? I think the whole world thinks so at this point. I think what really kind of stuck out the most, and we watched this together, was the final kind of episode to cap it all off when they were doing online interviews with the cast. I don't know if you saw that, Ryan, but it was basically like a Where Are They kind of episode. And I think that was kind of the ending that I needed to solidify my case of, oh, okay, this was well put together. Because going into it, I was like, well, zoo owner, bumfuck nowhere, abusing animals, killing animals, hick town. Sounds like Trailer Park Boys to me. Which is kind of what my assumption was. But I'm glad I saw it.
I've heard it's like the Crocodile Hunter, but on like steroids, like just crazy.
It's like a train wreck. You can't look away. Like it's not good to watch, but you can't not watch.
Oh.
I didn't need to watch this documentary to know that animal abuse is bad. I'll say that.
Well, it was just really interesting to hear how they justified it, I guess, because like what's interesting is a lot of them made a lot of points about like conservation and things like that, and they were like in the right direction, and they were really close, but they didn't quite get there. like I don't remember who it was, but one of them said something about how if you have endangered animals, the first thing you should do is like make more. And I was like, you have the right idea, but the wrong execution. Like, yeah, we should probably make more, but we also shouldn't sell them to private owners in the United States. But like, you got the right idea, I guess. So I think that was what was most fascinating to me about watching it, was like they think they're doing the good thing. And I think that's what's so interesting about stories in general, but especially stories like this, because they think that they're doing the right thing. Like, no one thinks of themselves as the bad guy. So it's just like really interesting to hear their perspective.
Yeah, I still have not watched it. I am caught up though on a different Netflix sensation that I think is a lot more global, Money Heist, also known as La Casa de Papel. So like I've already followed up on the new part, because they've broken up all of their seasons into parts. So realistically, even though this is like part 4, I don't know if they're still technically on season 2, because I know, well, without spoiling anything, I see more in the future, more Money Heist, especially because there's a discussion documentary that I'm dying to watch where you see a snippet of the discussion where some of the actors are saying that this show flopped. Like, this was just intended to be this Spanish, heist thriller show with like some really bad drama, and it ended up, it was on Netflix. I first found out about it, I was in Brazil when I first found out about the show, and I fell in love with the show while I was there. And then Netflix picked it up and said they were going to make more. And at first I was like, okay, this is getting a little too wild and a little too James Bond, but it's been a pretty solid run, and I'm thrilled for more. And, any chance I get to watch a TV show where they play anti-fascist anthems like Bella Ciao. Like you're not gonna hear this part Sicilian complain. So, anywho, well, all I can say is I knew you well, Sebastian, and the future will not look the same.
Thanks. Okay. Well, I feel like I'm walking into the dentist because this is a topic that I think we've been hinting at for a while now. It's so preposterously general, and I guess the best way to end a war is to drop a bomb on it. So the question on the table today. I'm gonna stand back in case the guns start going off.
Oh my god.
What is art? And I think having a three-way discussion here is going to be very interesting because I'm not sure if we all have different opinions on what like defines it, not only as a genre of medium, but also what it represents to the individual and a collectivist group. But we've been thinking about this a lot and kind of what our show revolves around, but we've never addressed the question. So not to sound like pretentious 20-somethings, but we're going to talk about art.
Yeah, this seemed like the right kind of subject, just because with your background in writing and in satire, and in my background in journalism, I can imagine a lot of people listening to us saying, "Well, what do these guys know about art?" And it's like, well, we also have grown up.
How about this? How about let's not ask us. Let's ask our guest, who has tackled an even, I would say, wider kind of demographic of the medium. Like you said, theater.
Yeah.
So, kind of go into that.
Well, first, just to give my credentials out there.
Oh,
just so that we're all aware that theater in itself is not an exclusive art form. So I deal with visual art, I deal with light as art, I deal with sound as art, music, dance, what are the other design concepts? Clothing, furniture, like just about everything comes into play. And even if you don't think it's there, it's always there in the theater, both visually and performance-wise. So what's really exciting about what I've been studying for the last 4 years, and then in high school and all that time before that, is like not just theater in a bubble, but like all of art as a whole. Like I've taken a lot of art history classes and everything and how it relates. So I don't want to say I'm a connoisseur, but gotta give myself a little street cred where it's due.
I don't want to say I'm a connoisseur, but I will hop up on my soapbox for a second.
Yeah, this is an important discussion. And it's something that a lot of my professors have led discussions about, so this is not my first debate on the topic. But I think my point in a nutshell is everything is art. And I can tell from previous discussions, especially at least with Sebastian, that he doesn't agree in the entirety. In the entirety of that statement.
Well, okay. In preparation for this episode, we kind of have to first lay out on the table that any opinion we have, whether or not something is art or not art, or something is representative of something or not, that is all unfalsifiable. Meaning that, like, subjectively, it can't be wrong, no matter which way the pendulum swings. And as much as kind of anyone on this planet would love to like throw facts and statistics and hearsay about one's point of view and attempt to convince the other, personally, I'm not trying to convince. It's just kind of the way I've seen it growing up. Looking at art in sort of an apolitical point of view, lot of people would assume that that's sort of ignorance looking in, where you're not attaching a deeper meaning to something because you don't know what that deeper meaning is. Well, a lot of 20-somethings stroll into museums and try to attach deeper meanings to something that they've only seen once. Okay?
But there's nowhere in the definition that art has to have a deeper meaning.
No.
We like to look for it.
No, we like to look at it. We like to look for it. But I think my main point is that in a lot of ways, and definitely when it comes with age and experience, and especially at that young age, I think we do like to make snap judgments about what something represents. And it may not be the right judgment, but it may be made in an air to sound smart and sophisticated. That's kind of where I have a problem with it. It's not so much whether or not art is art, but whether or not someone presenting it is an actual artist or an art connoisseur. Now, I'm going to again preface this by kind of taking a step back and saying that this is my opinion on a form that is my own. Please deep breath before you want to nail me to the fucking cross.
I would like everyone to know that he just wandered into the bathroom to yell that. So if that's not dedication to his art, then I don't know what is, man.
Now,
I mean, he could have done the network thing and just like walked up to a window and said, "This is my opinion on art, and I don't give a damn what you think."
The windows are open, and honestly, I didn't want to cause a public disturbance.
We appreciate.
But I think growing up around people putting on airs, at least in my personal perspective, has kind of ruined the whole what is art debate, because I've seen a lot of thoughtless arguments that really pick apart an art piece that I think is meant to convey something completely different.
But I don't think the topic of discussion at hand is, does art have meaning? The question is, what is art? So I think art in itself is not necessarily something you have to discuss. And I think that's a really unpopular opinion amongst people who are like, I like to go to museums and discuss the art in depth. But like, I can also make the argument that everything in my room right now is art. From the bed to the clock, to my curtains, to the quilt on my bed. Like, all of it's art. And high art is probably a little different, but art is art.
Why is it art to you?
Because
like,
someone had to make it.
No. Well, yeah, but when you're purchasing this specifically for you, or finding it or making it, specifically purchasing it, I guess, you're buying it because it speaks to you. It's representational of what you want in your room. So you could argue that it does have a meaning because those white curtains would fit well against that gray wall.
Yeah, it does. It does have meaning to a certain extent. But it doesn't have to have this high value, intense meaning. Like, this is speaking to me on what is the meaning of life. It just could be as simple as, well, that white and that gray really complement each other really well, and I think it would go well in my room.
And that's it.
That's
a great like short and sweet thing. I wish more people kind of had that, where it's not so much you don't realize the value of what something brings to the table, but you look at it at like sort of a face value, whereas like you're not thinking twice about the curtains in your room. You're thinking more about them as if they block out the shade or the sun. Otherwise, you'd be an English teacher in high school being like, well, what does the blue in the curtains represent? Kind of bullshit.
Well, I think that's a different argument, though, because in a lot of art, there's also a lot of subtext from the artist that a lot of the times the artist doesn't realize. So when I was in high school and the teacher was like, why did the writer make the chair blue? And in high school, I was like, well, maybe he just wanted to make it blue. Yeah. But then I took a creative writing class at CSUN and I wrote poetry and things like that. And the way that class worked was we brought in a piece and we would read it to the class. and then everyone else would discuss it as if they were at a museum or whatnot, or they were in an English class, and they discuss it in front of you, but you're not allowed to say anything. So what was really interesting to me when my work was read out loud and then they discussed it is a lot of times they found meanings that were true that I didn't even realize. So I also think a lot of art has to do with the interpretation and who's viewing it. Like, art is not independent of the audience, and so that's really important to think about.
No, that's exactly right. Art is independent of the artist, right?
Not necessarily.
Well, in certain circumstances where someone creates something because they were genuinely inspired to do so, and nothing else, where they don't think twice about associating a different meaning to it.
But that doesn't mean that it's not there. So because you're not thinking about it doesn't mean that it's not subconsciously brought out.
But
I think that's what's so interesting.
But it's also subjectively placed upon by someone else. So it's like,
it's a conversation.
Right, but if someone creates a piece for either an intended purpose or not an intended purpose, and someone comes in with their own definition of what that represents, even if it is subjective, at the end of the day, the person who made it kind of has the final say.
Not necessarily, though. And I think that was what was so interesting to me about that creative writing class and all of the art that I've created in my lifetime is like every piece of art is a conversation between the artist and the audience, whether they intend it or not. So for like in the performing arts, it's a little more apparent that your audience is there. But what's really interesting is like when people talk about, well, why would you rather do live theater than film? I react to the audience and I react to the energy in the room that's not necessarily as present or is present in a different way than it is in film and TV. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little more apparent of an audience. But when I create a painting, I'm projecting my own thoughts and opinions and internal biases and subconscious thoughts on that piece of canvas, and then you're going to come and look at it and you're going to interpret it differently. So it's a different conversation, but it's still a conversation. It's through a different medium, still there. Because if I wanted to create a piece of art solely for myself, then it's a conversation between me and myself. So every piece of art has an artist and it has an audience, no matter how big or small that audience is.
Mm-hmm. Well said. No, really.
Thank you. Had a lot of practice on this page.
It's not really a because
I think it's more of an exploration of a topic.
It's more of an exploration of it. There is a distinct reason why, at least in my personal case, that I am not the major I am now versus when I entered college. At least in the art department specifically, like in general, like, illustration-wise. Visual arts. We had this snobby artist type in classes. We had the snobby artist professors where if they want to put on airs about this whole notion of subjectivity within visual arts and then just proclaim that, oh, well, your art just isn't following my rigid guidelines, well, that's kind of hypocritical. Now,
yeah,
I can't speak for theater. I can only speak for my past self in high school when I did drama for 3 years. But no, you make a good point about having that audience interaction, because theater and a painting, while they are both different strains of visual art, in general, one doesn't necessarily have an audience. You don't paint with an audience typically.
No, the audience receives the work afterwards.
Right.
Just like I don't have an audience when I'm in the rehearsal process.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I do. I have the creative team and my castmates. But, like, it's a different audience.
One is more of a one-on-one with other people. The other, like, as you said, is a one-on-one for yourself. At least until you put it out there.
But that's not necessarily always the case. It can be a case in certain times, but a lot of artists create art for other people. A lot of, if we want to talk into the more rigid definition of like this is the visual arts and these are the performing arts and things like that, they're creating art a lot of times with a purpose in mind. And so, like, as a director, something that has been a really intense discussion in my advanced directing class has been what is the message you're trying to communicate and how are you communicating it?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's there to be a discussion, and it's there to deliver a message. Sometimes it can be as simple as like go outside and have more fun, or sometimes it's more intense, like this is why we shouldn't have war. And like art is always political, whether you want it to be or not, in any sense political. And it doesn't necessarily mean like government political, but like I'm expressing my views and I'm expressing my opinions in art. Just like this is a conversation, but this is art as well.
Yeah.
This is
Yep.
the art of the discussion, the art of the podcast.
I found myself, when I say apolitical in the beginning, it's not so much that I'm attaching these strict political definitions, but it's more so I'm setting my expectations purposefully low so that I can walk out of the exhibit or the museum having learned something I didn't know before. Because I don't want to go into the Pod or the Guggenheim or the Getty with these predisposed notions of, oh, I've seen this piece before, I know what it means, and if I find anyone with an earshot, I'm going to tell them what it means. Rather, I try to at least go to museums I haven't gone before, whether they be like independent or like little exhibits, like when we both went to San Francisco. I haven't been to San Francisco in like 14 years since the last time we went. And these little like mom and pop shop exhibits, I got to tell you, going into San Francisco kind of with the predisposed notion of what it was like politically was one instance. But the arts district is flourishing. And going into these centers with art I've never seen before, I think I got more of a worthwhile experience. Not so much attaching political undertones, but more so what I can associate with the pieces afterwards.
Right.
I think that's fun about art.
Yeah.
Is the taking it in.
Yeah.
But also you can take it in more than once. Like when you watch a movie a second time, you notice things that you didn't notice the first time, and that'll keep happening no matter how many times you watch the movie. Like even the creative team sees new things when they watch it, and so that's what's so exciting. Like to go to a museum and discuss what it means. Like a month ago or 2 months ago, I think, before like the quarantine happened, Sebastian and I went to the Getty Villa, and that's mostly like it's based off of like a Roman villa. They like recreated one out in Malibu, and it's just full of different artifacts and things like that. And you're looking at it and you're like, oh, it's ancient Greek, it's so high class.
Yeah.
But then sitting there and going, well, that's an image of a dude puking into a vase on a vase.
Yeah. It's so high class, you realize how they really lived, which I can appreciate art that, it's not that it comes off as pretentious because it's kind of maybe all in one place that makes you think that way. But to instill humanity, like to have, okay, this isn't what I planned to see, but I'm glad I saw it. It's the monkey wrench that always turns the head. So I'm glad I saw it. I never, because it's been a while since I've been back to the Getty as well. Yeah, I've never seen that before. I think with art personally, it's kind of a matter of just seeing new things, which is why I try to not let myself sit on a medium like film or plays or books for too long. The way I do it, at least, which has worked for myself, is I'll read a book or I'll watch a movie, and then I won't read that book, watch that movie, play that video game for a very, very, very long time. And then when I can come back to it with a fresh face, with a fresh outlook on it, then I can form new opinions, assuming I even want to read, watch, or play that thing again. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I think what's interesting is for a lot of artists, it's the opposite. Because
they'd want to be more and more exposed.
Well, when you think about it, like the average rehearsal process for a lot of shows is 6 weeks. Like as far as live theater goes, it's anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks, and you just spend that entire time dissecting that play. And in the different mediums that everyone works in, how does this play manifest itself in light? How does this play manifest itself in words or visually? And so it's like the total opposite of what you're talking about. Like you keep digging deeper, and every time you read through it, it's different. And every time you speak the words, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't think about that before. And so it's like, I also think that's what's writing about art as well. And I think that's why so many people like theater people will spend 6 weeks of their lives looking at just one play. Like, and I guess that's in the actor standpoint. Designers and directors start looking at it months before rehearsals even start. So the show that I was directing this semester was Aristophanes' Lysistrata. We started working on that back in December. And so, like, and I still haven't figured everything else about, I still haven't figured everything out about that play, even though we had rehearsed 2 weeks and I had been working on it since December. We were just scratching the surface in rehearsals before we were unfortunately canceled. And so it's just like, there are times where I can become obsessed with a piece of art just because I'm like, oh my God, what, I want more out of it. What does it mean?
Well, Ryan, I know we've kind of been going back and forth here, and I feel bad that we've kind of left you out of it.
Yeah. This has been fascinating, yeah.
So, kind of to just spin the question around before we continue, coming from where you live and the political background you've grown up with and the discipline you chose to study, really, what is art to you? And I guess in your perspective, in the journalistic sense.
Well, I think with art, there's two, it like any sort of medium that we've ever, invented or engineered, to send information to people or to just splash color onto a cave wall, onto a sheet of paper, onto a canvas, onto a wall, whatever it may be. Art has gone from being a communication device and being a way to document history and tell people of the future, what the past was like. Art has sort of divulged into these two categories. One of which is art is simply out there just as euphoria, just as some kind of, thing that kind of eases you and comforts you and keeps you feeling good, whatever it may be, or, feeling bad if that's what you want. And then the second path for art is the George Orwell line of all art is propaganda. And that being whatever the art form may be, whether it's a film, a novel, some opinion piece, or a piece of music or a podcast. That's where you start to sort of go down that path of it's for the sake of a political message, but that political message could be virtually anything.
Well, it's just interesting to me that you think all of those things are separate. Like you originally said, like it used to be about documenting history and preserving and showing future generations. No one thought that's what they were doing when they were doing it. Like the ancient Greeks were building their columns, not thinking that us 2,000 years later, we're going to see them and go, oh, that's how they lived. So no one thinks they're doing that in the moment. And so our art is gonna preserve itself after we're gone. And we just don't quite acknowledge that yet. But it also does exist in a euphoric state and to make us feel good. But it also exists to make us feel uncomfortable. And it is all propaganda, but it all exists at once in the same piece of art. They're not exclusive from each other.
Well, that kind of ties into the whole question of whether or not one should associate one's own artistic identity with themselves in the extent of they're creating and they don't know what power it's going to hold, or associating oneself with a movement or a expectation set upon them, like a societal expectation. And kind of like the meme that I've found, which is, I'm not sure if it's in poor taste or satire when I say this, and I'll try to like recall it as best I can, but it's the image of an art gallery with like this impact font, and it says, guess what, guys, we've created enough like intersectional whatever it is to the point where racism and all the rest are officially canceled. Like, art did it, and it's kind of intended as a joke. So I think like the main question is like, is putting yourself in the shoes of those expectations of certain groups, of certain orientations, is that too much for the artist to handle expectation-wise? So should they create for the sake of filling a quote?
I think that question exists in every piece of art, and the way that the art is created is either in agreement with that or in rejection of it.
Well, if it's in rejection of it, that's the thing. If it's a slight deviation from the norm, which is, what a movement establishes, then that artist is ostracized. Then that artist is seen as like, oh, well, you're not in support. And that could also be very damaging to an artist's reputation, because it's like, well, shit, now I don't have this group backing me or supporting me. Now what?
That's part of what being an artist is, though.
I don't think that the volatility of one's, let's say, race, sex, gender, political, social orientation, though, should kind of dictate that, though. It should be like the string that holds together an artist's success and failure.
Well, that's just it. Is that's where the propaganda of today comes into play. Is you wind up getting that one artist who they want to have their artwork be whatever message they may want it to be, or they're serving the message of somebody else, and they're going to translate it in the best way that they can. Now, when it comes back to my point about documenting history, I didn't mean so much like things like cultural items or buildings or old structures, whether they're structures in the American Southwest or in Greece or the pyramids in Egypt. It's more whatever documentation that they use to try and preserve their history and to inform for the future, whether that's the artist's name is escaping me, but the guy who did the famous painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Now, that painting is informative to us because it's showing us John Adams and John Jay and Benjamin Franklin and Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson and all these people with John Hancock and Charles Carroll and all the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And yet, close to 50 years after the fact, John Adams himself sees it, and this is long after he's been president, and he comments that this is very poor history. So if anything, that's kind of where that's like the link in the chain where art goes from being, a form of storytelling into a form of propaganda.
Well, yeah, I mean, imagine if American Dirt was written by a white woman. How different would the argument be then?
Well, I think that's what ties back into your point, though, about all art is propaganda, and it's always been propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not exclusive to when America became a thing. And right now I've been studying art history starting from the ancient Egyptians. Right now I'm up until the early Victorian times. The ancient Egyptians were using art as propaganda. They were using art to decorate the tombs and the walls to make the people think that they were a god on earth. That's propaganda.
Yep.
That's not me preserving my history for future generations. That's me preserving my history, but then making you think that I was a god on earth.
Well, they didn't.
Their pyramids in Egypt were originally plated in gold or topped with gold because it reflected the sunlight and it connected the sun god down to earth.
Yep.
So propaganda has always been a part of art, and your art is always going to reflect who you are as a person. So tying back into your point, Sebastian, about how you're catering to one group or whatnot, as a white woman in America, my art is always going to represent the view of a white woman in America.
Exactly.
Even if I'm telling a story about another culture or another race, it's always through the lens of a white woman in America.
And see that, but that's the thing. That's kind of like where you need to walk on eggshells a little bit, because as much as someone can be passionate about a project, them not looking a certain way, it takes in most cases. Well, and I think I understand that me being who I am, what I look like, what I believe in, what I identify myself with, I won't cater to everyone. And I think right, left, center, sideways, no one is going to, but people can at least attempt to do so. It's sad that the message doesn't get across.
What message?
Well, the message of whether or not you're accepting of a certain stance or rejective of a certain stance. It's always going to file back into, I would say what one is overtly presented as.
Well, but not necessarily. And so something that seems to be a misconception a lot of times in art is, yes, I can only tell my story as a white woman in America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean I can't help tell a story of a person of color in America, or a person of color in another country. So, like, what's coming to my mind right now as we talk about this is a show I did last semester. It's called The 10th Muse. And it was written about Spanish nuns in the Inquisition settling in present-day Mexico City. Right. And it took place in a convent, but the leading character was a young girl of mixed race. And so she was half indigenous, half Spanish. And how she navigated the world during the Spanish Inquisition. And so that story is uniquely about fighting for this young girl's right as a woman and girl of mixed race. Is she Spanish? Is she indigenous? What do we do? Is she Catholic? And so that's uniquely her story. But I was still in the show, and something and something that was like, what it was actually controversial because when I was cast in the show, it was I was one of only 2 white women in the show, and it was, other than that, it was other women of color. It was entirely a female cast, and someone had actually vandalized our poster saying that it's okay to be white in the show about people of color.
Oh, that's
but what's something that was missing is the fact that someone has to be the bad guy. So someone has to play the opposition. So as a young woman of color, it wasn't my character, but there's another character that was rejecting her because she was a young woman of color and wanted to keep her down and wanted to keep her in her place. But then my role was to help aid her in her journey of establishing herself and fighting for what she deserves, even though I'm still a white woman and I only have the experience of a white woman in America.
Well, also, if you look at it religiously, you're also not Catholic.
Yeah, I'm also not a Catholic.
The thing is, you're not Spanish, you're not Catholic. How are you playing a nun, kind of thing?
Yeah.
But I mean, you still did it beautifully, and I think in those certain circumstances where it's, I'm not saying it's a niche play, but it's definitely a play not a lot of people would have heard of without some, at least prior knowledge of it. And I think in this instance, when you played the role that you did, people were looking at more so your performance rather than what you looked like. The fact that you weren't a woman of color, a woman who wasn't Catholic, your performance held it together.
Well, not only that, but like.
And I think that's great.
I'm still of European descent, and something that there's another misconception a lot of when people heard about the casting was people of Spanish descent, especially during the Inquisition, were very much European. And so I was representing that. Yeah, as I sit here next to my young Spanish boy who's whiter than I am.
Can't help you there, buddy.
That role, so in a way, it's like we were utilizing my existence as a white woman, and so that can like even lead into the discussion of like colorblind casting. It's not truly blind, but not necessarily like you have to appease to specific groups, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not like you even make that choice. It's just kind of like that's the inherent bias that everyone lives with.
It's so hard to not disagree to a point, because whenever, and this is more inclined to instances of maybe pop culture, whereas following maybe specific trends or specific popularity spikes, that recreation of certain things, and more so the artists' recreational renditions. I don't know. I think that just kind of funnels into where I have a problem with like the attitudes associated with it.
Are you talking about cultural appropriation?
Not so much cultural appropriation, but more so I have it in my notes, and I did take notes, by the way.
Oh god.
Well, I did too. I've barely gotten through. I've gotten through my
I guess
first.
they didn't come prepared enough.
You've been listening to Mars on Life. Part 2 of this episode will be available in just a couple of days. Please make sure that you find us over on social media at Mars on Life Show on both Twitter and on Instagram. And on top of that, you can find this show on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Our artwork is done by Zachary Erberich, and our intro music is Space Explorers by Kevin MacLeod. I've been Ryan Mancini. My co-host, as always, is Sebastian Shug. And just remember, if you keep on going, you'll make it to Mars.